So thanks for coming to this, our talk. Most people get scared when they see governance and policy, so thank you for coming. Real quick, Beth and I both work at JPMorgan, and we're very heavily involved in the FinOps space. All right, so let me just jump right in here. So today, we're going to talk about the things that impact FinOps that you may not have control of, right? That you do need to build policy and governance around, right? So this one's around, let's, for example, your cloud strategy, right? How do you onboard accounts? How do you do things, right? Is it centralized or is it federated, right? The more centralized things you do in, let's say, cloud enablement, the more control you have. But you probably lose some friction, but you probably gain the ability to do a lot more FinOps stuff, right? You can bake it in. If you're federated, where you let the businesses and users do whatever they want, right? It's less control, less friction. They're probably happier, but you don't have the ability to bake stuff in, right? So think about how you can bake in things that are more proactive from the start, regardless of which model you have. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later, versus being less reactive. Reactive is still good, and you've got to do a lot of reactive stuff, but the more you can bake it from the start, the better. All right, so now you have people onboarding accounts. How many steps do you actually have to approve this stuff, right? Is it like straight through processing? JP, we have, there's a fair number of steps to get through. Of course, cyber and operations and all that stuff, right? But that'll also impact it. And then all the other stuff you have to do, right? So how do you do cost estimates, forecasting? How do you review your architecture, best practices to make sure you're building it from the start, right? Not just FinOps, but everything. And it's gonna feel like a big journey, right? But you're gonna get there eventually, right? You're gonna live, you learn. And then this is the most important point, but maybe I'm gonna make this whole presentation, is how long is your spend, measure, learn cycle, right? So if you look at FinOps every quarter, that's 4 times a year, probably not a lot of feedback. If you do it daily, it's probably business days 220 times a year. You're gonna get pretty good at it very quickly, right? It's a key ingredient because you're gonna take action much quicker, right? And FinOps is about real-time action. This is, hand it over to Beth now. We're tag teaming.
All right, the finance stuff. So we talk a lot about setting budgets and how you go about that, and that process inside of all of your firms, depending upon where you are in your journey, is going to be very different. Clearly, we're here talking about variable costs. I don't have to explain to anybody in the room what that actually means, but we do get to explain it to a lot of our internal customers. The variable nature of moving to public cloud is both obvious and somehow not obvious, even to our engineering teams. They both understand it intellectually, but don't necessarily translate that to the just the amount that you should be scared maybe about it, just a little bit when you're thinking about it from a control environment, and especially in your ability to forecast what that expenditure might be, and therefore keep control of your bubble costs. I would say that it's a talent all on its own if you can actually get folks to really understand what that means and manage that in a tight cycle. Realistically, that means that operational excellence really will only come when you're getting to both tight forecasting from your new infrastructure, but not forgetting about the theoretical old and crusty stuff that nobody wants to pay attention to is the hardest thing that you can do, which is get somebody to not pay attention to the new and shiny and go back to the old and actually turn it off. It's usually where the biggest savings come from, besides the key learnings as you're going through that journey. We talk about pricing internally, where discounts can be difficult to understand. Pricing models and what you're choosing for your different architectures will obviously change a lot about what a person's going to actually pay at the end of the day, but the more simple that you can make that pricing conversation internally, the better off everybody is going to be. It seems like a no-brainer, but yet we tend to overcomplicate those conversations and want to be finite about all of it. So that goes out to all of your product owners, your utilizers of, from a developer's standpoint, and your executives overall. Hey guys.
Go on sleep.
Did you go to sleep? All right, I'm gonna keep going. Finance and business management folks, they are new to a space of really not necessarily understanding deeply about their infrastructure. And for them, it is something that they actually need to be invested in. So time from a FinOps practitioner's standpoint, it's worth the investment to have them come up to speed to really understand what that means in a new world. It isn't something that happens over there. The closer you can come to common knowledge, using the same language, and being able to, bridge those conversations more easily, the better off everybody is. And FinOps practitioners, for us, definitely help bridge that gap between all of the different personas that are out there. They really can start to bring those conversations together in a meaningful way. So there's a bunch of stuff on here. I will go quickly through this one for you. Everybody needs a tool. It is a decision for you based on where you are in your journey, whether you're going to buy a tool, whether you're going to build a tool, whether you're going to use native services, whatever it is. The more multi-cloud you are, you usually have a more complicated set to solve for. So you will probably move through that journey over time and say, next problem I have to solve for internally. More clouds you're on, the more consolidation you're doing. We spend a lot of time on normalization and enrichment so that when we look at our internal sets of information, whether you're a CIO or whether you're an engineer, it's very important that you're picking up the exact same number and understanding that application costs me. There's no different variation or reporting that we have going on there. The more that you consider your individual sustainability goals for your firm and bring those conversations together as well, there's a lot of crossover in here. So as much crossover as you can have from a metrics perspective, OKRs, however you're running your business, there's usually crossover, and it's another way for people to get close to this information and pay attention to it. It's another line of consistency. You really need to make it easy for your purchasing agents who are at this point your developers. So moved from hey, we make a decision once a year and we order a box, so maybe it lasts us 3 years and I don't think about what our costs are to now I can impact my bottom line on a daily basis. So yes, the faster that you can look at your spend, measure, and learn cycle, the better for all. All right?
All right. So here's some best practices, right? So dev test, right? You should be able to shut off most things over the weekends and nights, right? So you're looking at 70% right there, right? So if you can do that, any other extra you get is kind of gravy. Automate, right? So SRE is a big, contributor to automation of a lot of processes. Have them help you out with your FinOps automation, right? You don't want to constantly be doing things over and over. All this is code. As I mentioned earlier, just build it into your infrastructure as code, right? Use spot instances, use the smallest instances, do all the right things as best as you can in your code base that you share with your developers. And then, listen, you probably are going to have to do a little bit of scorecarding. There is some gaming in the system that can go on, right? Somebody could actually schedule an hour off on a weekend and get a check for actually doing scheduling right. So you don't want to be the FinOps police, but at the same time, you got to really call out the folks that really aren't contributing the way they should be. All right, so optimization opportunities, right? So the cloud service providers are all making, right, all kinds of recommendations with machine learning, and emailing, and you can set up all kinds of budget alerts and all things like that. I think the big question with this is how do you get engineers to take action, right? You got to give them good information, right? So maybe look at third-party tools for managing Kubernetes, right? Because that's a bit of an art to it. CPU and mem optimizations, we've been dealing with that on-prem forever, right? But if somebody's at 0% CPU or 0% memory use, come on, they're not using it, right? When you're 10, 20, 30, you have a discussion. And make sure, if you do send out emails, that there's not a lot of false positives, right? Once people get emails that aren't accurate, they just ignore them all. And listen, it can be repeat emails about good stuff that also people forget about as well. So you really have to figure out how to manage all that. And then if you do have a big item, right? I don't know how many of you are agile, but put it right in their backlog. It's a $50,000 a month item, just automatically goes in their backlog, right? The smaller ones. And once again, the 80-20 rule applies. Go after the big stuff, right? Don't worry about the little stuff. And then when you get to production, that's where you really need to have, deep discussions with everybody because it's much harder. You could be impacting your business. So the rules probably need to be a little different there, but I think the same methodology applies. So here's a bunch of stuff about how to make it repeatable, right? So don't give developers something to start their journey, right? So we kind of look at the main use cases as kind of being these: microservices, ML, data lake, data analytics. If you give them a code base that starts them on that road for their cloud journey, you can build all kinds of stuff into that path, right? They could change it later on, as the life cycle, the drift happens, but build it in from the start. And there's much more payback for being proactive than reactive, right? You're doing things from the start, you just get it out of the box. And there's some, some strange ones that maybe people don't think about, right? So you have, I don't know, 10,000 servers running in the cloud. Not all of them are provisioned today. Some of them are provisioned a year ago, 2 years ago. If people just upgrade to the latest instance type, you'll save money and get performance. It's not just about just getting to cloud a little bit, right? There's a lot of stuff there. So think about kind of the whole life cycle and how you can impact it. And the other things that we've seen that have been very successful is we actually have cloud parties. We bring people together and have teams go through, let's say, building a microservice on cloud, look at the SRE capabilities they need, look at the FinOps capabilities they need, right? And there's a lot of power in people getting together that are solving the same problem. You'd be surprised. All right.
Yes. Go ahead.
Back to Beth.
Yeah. Central FinOps teams, depending upon what your setup is, could be centralized by line of business, or it could be like in our case where we very much have a centralized view on these things. We manage firm-wide discounts in totality. We look at opportunities and we manage it like a risk portfolio, as you might expect that we would. We purchase on behalf of the firm, and then we have this process of sharing out on a pro rata basis. So an application owner or a business isn't doing something specific on their own to garner that next big leap in incremental discounts. We take care of that for them. Yes, we have special use cases where we're looking at do we need to cover them in a different way for a particular technology, but it's a live conversation that's going on all of the time. We have a consideration for, what are we going to do for that next level of investment for a new technology. We're taking a look at what their outward forecasts are, how committed they are on the technology front to that. So it isn't just like, do you have a solid business case? We're really talking about them from the technology front as well, not just a finance business case. We do a lot of crossover in that area. Driving top-down awareness, this sort of goes back to what I mentioned earlier. The idea that we really need to make sure that both top of house, whether it's Jamie or a technology leader, see the exact same numbers as what an application owner does. That's exactly what our focus is at all times. Sounds very easy, but not necessarily, because people like to take liberty with doing their own standalone analysis, et cetera. So we make sure that we have a consolidated view on that front. We do take the opportunity to point out, where there's opportunities for a particular line, et cetera. So those conversations become a little bit more organic and more of a operational focus, as opposed to, hey, you missed an opportunity to save a thing. It is more about what are we doing and potentially changing moving forward. It doesn't always have to land you on a naughty list. It often opens up really good conversations about what else we need to consider. Good behavior, of course, always rewarded. Everybody wants to be at the top of the list. And then we're talking really about how we help you move off if it's an area that you need to explore. And always focusing on the bubble costs in total and what do you need to do to decommission that old and crusty. We have a very active FinOps practitioners community, which was started quite organically. It was a grounds-up effort initially before we moved to, and it grew legs for those that were interested, and we ended up with this large community of folks. They meet on a very regular basis, and it crosses all personas. This is not a finance activity. This is not operations on their own or technology on their own. They share wins, they share ideas about the things that they would like to see, either coming from central groups or ideas that they have for creating their own. And yes, it will be a naturally organic place where some really interesting things will be put together that often we end up leveraging longer term. The community and practice piece, I actually want to talk about it, but I'm going to let Andrew.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go for it.
So don't underestimate the power of the FinOps community, right? So a lot of the teams are building tools, they're doing things. They all need similar things, right? They're all working for the same firm. It's not like there's a different cloud platform they're adopting, right? So bringing them together, one, exposes everybody to who else they are, and then what work they're doing, right? And a lot of this work isn't like a full-blown project where they're building the showback tool for the firm. It could be solving bubble cost management or something. And we see it all the time, right? We actually we have an event, JPMorgan does a tech event once a year, and people submit papers and all, right? And there were like 40 or so tools submitted for this conference, right? And a lot of them were overlapped. Nobody knew they were going on. So don't underestimate the power of the community. Share, I would say, through that community, work people are doing, so they can get to see it, and then you will get synergies. People will work together, right? I think it's in the book. Key thing is when the conversation's happening with you not being in the room anymore, right? As a FinOps professional, that's when you know you've hit momentum, right? If you're the only one doing it, it's very difficult. And it's everywhere. And I think Beth mentioned this a little bit, but the product owners, right, who build platforms, they're looking at one view of it, right? All their users. If they build efficient products, then people can consume them efficiently, right? So it goes along with that as well. So everybody's needs to be involved in that. So I know we ran through that quickly. Any questions? Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about, you were talking about rewarding good behavior and penalizing bad behavior. Can you talk about your rewards and your penalties?
So the rewards, right? So we want people to do the right thing. We actually just had a discussion about creating an efficiency scorecard instead of a red, amber, green type thing, right? Which people get very upset about. We actually talked about people who reach the top of the list. One, we publicize them, but maybe they get to meet, have lunch with senior leaders, right? They get something. It's hard to give them more money. It's hard to give them more resources, right? But give them that recognition. And like I said, being able to actually share their innovations and actually get to like this conference we're going to is really enough motivation for them, right? Because it also speaks to their excellence in this space and how they're not only helping themselves, but they're helping the whole firm out. Sure.
What's your thought on serverless? Like I noticed that a lot of your remediation type stuff is sort of centered around instances, savings calculated instances, but are you doing a lot of that?
Yes. Yeah. The more you can buy what you're actually going to use, the better it is, right? So you can go that way. I would say that's in the architecture phase, right? And that's where the blueprints come into, so you have a microservice blueprint, you give them a whole EKS, ECS, Fargate out of the box, you have less problems to worry about rather than the developer doing on all on their own.
I was curious to know if for a bank, security issues around serverless might be a big.
Yes, there's work to do there. Yes, there's work to do there, but we've gotten through, a lot of that. And I think the cloud providers have gotten very financial services, regulatory company aware now, right? Maybe 10 years ago was a much bigger difference.
How accurately are you able to kind of predict your demand and buy up the right amount of resources?
I'll let her talk about that.
Pretty accurately. The closer we are to those teams, the closer we are to the teams that are really focused on, what their delivery is over the next year, understanding what their seasonality is, when they're pushing products, what their own customer behavior is, will really change how we cover. So yes, the closer we are to the business and understanding what that is, then we actually have a pretty great deal of success in that area.
So would you say it's 80% accurate, 70% accurate, 95?
I'd say it's probably in the 80% accurate, yeah. And it's been a learning journey for them, right? Did we do that 2 years ago? Mm-hmm. That wouldn't have been the number I would have quoted. Yes.
So, I guess FinOps grew out of the public cloud need. Do you guys extend any of this back to your on-prem private cloud principles?
We do. The closer we've gotten to that, total cost of ownership discussion and focus on bubble costs so that we're really not leaving the other behind. Because in some cases, well, in many cases, you're running in a hybrid mode, so you're never going to leave it behind. So there's been a great deal of focus on being able to provide the full holistic view and not just have it be new versus old, because that's, constant innovation in both spaces. Yes.
Is there any tips to doing chargebacks with savings plans that are centrally bought?
Yeah, we've gone through a couple of different models. I would say that the one that you get the least amount of pushback on, because everybody feels like they get the equitable share, is we actually look across the whole entire estate in a given month period and say, if you are 5% of all compute utilization in the firm and I have a bucket of X dollars, you're going to get 5% of those savings. that month. And if your performance changes or your size, compared to the total changes over time, then we reassess. So I don't get any pushback on that one.
And just quick follow-up. Do you actually have to move it around after the bill comes in?
Yes, this is a separate internal process. It is one of the problems with if somebody's really only consuming, looking through like the native tools for what their utilization is, the providers put in like, hey, I've got a savings plan and we're doing those things. We spread them in different ways than providers. So we do have an education track around like, please focus on gross if you're looking inside of native tools versus what we show in-house. We're going to show you the holistic view and how we gave it back to you. And we separate that out. Yes.
Can you talk about how you're driving the sustainability conversation when it relates to FinOps?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of crossover. So Graviton's a perfect example. It's going to hit both fronts, whether you're, saving on cost or saving on power. So we've actually got a lot of exploration in the how do you bring the two together, because we have clearly our own tracks going at all times, but I think we'll have crossover coming in next year. So we'll have some OKRs that are quite specific in both areas. Yes?
First, thank you for the presentation.
Mhm.
When it comes to onboarding cloud services and it's being done in a more decentralized way, do you have any more specifics about requirements with the federated flow?
You want to take that one?
Yeah, so we're pretty centralized. I think it's really about cyber, right? Making sure cyber's happy and they have a model. I think about it in terms of like we have like a wholesale model in the middle, and then everybody kind of feeds into that versus it being like direct to customer, right? Like we create the capacity in the center, and then each LOB or each business unit kind of onboards kind of in those parameters, but there's no friction there. Right, so I think that's the model you got to get to is how we're very heavily regulated industry, right? So we pay attention to that friction because if it takes 90 days to onboard, people are going to get very upset, right? So you have to balance those two out based upon all your requirements, right? How you operate it, how you support it, right? Where those people are going to sit? Are they sitting in the center? Are they sitting in the lines of business? Right, so you have to kind of look at that whole picture. And what I've heard, most companies get this wrong 2 or 3 times before they get it right. Yeah, that's kind of part of our whole request process or overall agile, the way we manage stuff, right? So 10 requests come in for the same thing, it gets prioritized, right? So I think it's more just like regular requests. Now, some of this has to do with the capabilities from the provider, like how much they in sync with our adoption ability as well, right? So certain things we can't adopt, certain things we can. So it's going to be a combination of a bunch of those things. But I think you just need to look at it like any other request. Like if more people need it, it should get higher priority.
How do you ensure that your governance policies are being followed upon? Do you have like a process for it, or do you like use any kind of tool?
I think it's baked in. It's part of it, right? It's baked in. Like I said, like we put, from a policy perspective, we put it in the blueprints, right? People download the code, it's already there. We do check. I mean, there's always drift, right? Nothing's perfect. There's always a life cycle. But trying to make it as easy as possible to do those activities is key. Because once you have to work hard at it, you're just going to lose the battle in the long run. And not every application you onboard is going to be in that same state, right? So a greenfield app should look a lot better when you're done rather than something that's lifted and shifted and needed to be upgraded over its life.
I think you mentioned on one of the slides you use spot instances. Has there been a lot of pushback around interruptible workloads or non-interruptible workloads? And using spot there? Or?
It's where it makes sense, right? If you can meet the parameters, great. You're building something brand new, we use it. So it also depends on what the service is as well. But like for instance, in the blueprints, we put spot in as default. You have to go in and change it to something else if you don't want that, right?
So we give you a way out.
Yeah.
But we're leading you in that direction, so you really have to go through the thought process of like, oh, it absolutely will not work for us, so turn it off. Application owners absolutely are the ones that are going to know best what their needs are, and they should be making those business decisions, not me. Absolutely not.
So the blueprints they're governance, but they're still opt-out. Like you can tell me spot, but I can go to an R5 if I want.
Yes.
There's no blocking
There's no blocking, right? One
Right.
of the things we want to figure out is the lifecycle management of this, because if everything's drifting and people are going the wrong way, then you have to kind of have that product manager feedback loop to say, oh, what do we got to change in there? But we're always changing stuff, right? And one of the things that we've noticed is always try to get to the latest, right? Like I said, the earlier example, you deployed an EC2 on AWS 2 years ago, you're using the same one, you're missing something already. So how do you actually force people to do the latest? And you always do that when they're building new code in dev, right? You always push the latest, right? You do that in your Terraform or whatever you're doing, service catalog, whatever, right? Build that in, that process in, so you don't have to go clean it up later. Sure.
What are best practices for bubble costs in particular? Because sometimes teams just don't know how long it's going to take to migrate to the cloud.
You mean from a tracking perspective or how?
From helping teams estimate what their bubble costs are.
Yeah, that is a trick and a half, that's sure. So when we were talking about how good are folks at estimating what their costs are, I would say is the longer you've been in, they obviously get better. That beginning tranche is tough. And for us, we really go with the overly simplistic view of like, just get a number out, please start your testing, let's cycle back and reiterate on those. This should not be a once a year activity anymore, not in these times, and getting people to switch from we do this big giant budgeting exercise once a year to this, you should live and breathe these things. They should be revisited over time so that the forecast actually becomes more important than the budgeting. And then obviously they collide. But it really is a lot of getting them down to testing what their assumptions are initially and then revisiting that and giving them the help and understanding of that, read and cycle again. Shorten that cycle.
One last question. Have you done any work around unit cost in-house of either APIs or queue-based metrics that can say definitively for a million API calls, that's how much it costs? Or this is what it does.
Yeah, we've done some. The challenge is we're always investing more on the denominator, so it's hard, but it's a good indicator to know if you're being relatively efficient. So APIs, number of reports, number of cost per user, you can do that, but it is a challenge, right? So if you go in and think about it as a good estimate that you're being efficient, like, I don't know, 4 cents an API call, if it goes to 10, you probably got a problem. But if it goes to 5 or 3, could just because you haven't invested any, human resources, capital to build apps or something, and that's why the cost went down. But yeah, it's a good indicator. But it's still early days yet for us. We're looking at activity-based costing and some other ways to really help, right? It's the magic bullet of, oh, wow, I'm inefficient in that app, not quite there yet, right? But if you do all these things we talk about and what's available in the space, you'll know you're being as efficient as you can be for the right outcomes.
Any progress in like automated production governance? I know it's easy to make automated changes, but in prod it's a little bit trickier.
Yeah, so prod we really leave alone, right? We learn as we go, and that's kind of been the model because, you all a lot of you chase customers. You want to log into your mobile app. You want to make sure there's capacity there, right? So we're not going to nickel and dime that. But yeah, they do learn. They do, they do have that efficiency focus in mind. But performance is going to be key for prod versus dev test.
I know we've gone over time, but we'll also be around. So any other questions, we're happy to take them.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.